All right, now we're good.
Now we're good. Now we got it working. Again, always, every once in a while, technical difficulties getting our stuff going.
Also, we lost our studio audience, and I feel bad.
We had a studio audience and a beautiful studio. So,
And they had to go because it's apparently anyway. So, the scientific revolution / enlightenment, of which I have the enlightenment kind of sandwiched into the scientific revolution, and that's on purpose.
well, it does make sense because I don't know if you get to the Enlightenment without having the scientific revolution first, because if political science is truly a science, would you not need a revolution in science to bring out the scientific formula so we can understand how we want to follow politics?
See, that goes off the assumption that political science isn't necessarily a natural science. Political science is
It's a thinking man science.
It's a of course it is, says the political scientist, is a sociological science that is based upon the idea that humans can behave, God help us, in a rational manner.
Long hairy hippie at the bottom doesn't believe that.
Long hairy hippie at the top would disagree. So if you don't know who we're talking about, from the left, well, from the top to the right, to the bottom, to the left is John Locke, my man. Isaac, I'm a douchebag, but I don't really care. Newton. The bottom one is Thomas, you're a douchebag, and I know it, and everyone knows it. Hobbes. And the left is Tycho Brahe. And Tycho, I just love his name. Also, that stash.
Yeah, the mustache. I mean, the mustache is.
And the wonderful story. If you don't know the stories of Tycho Brahe, then I can't help you, and you've missed everything fun about history.
Yeah, you're going to have to look it up. I just got told it, but we're kind of crunched for time. So if we got time at the end, we'll sneak it back in.
So let's talk about, I guess, what do we want to connect the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment together? How do we want to do that? As in one came from the other, or the principles were applied, or how do we want to do this?
Well, if we come off the assumption that the Reformation challenges the powers and authorities, right? And we touched on that in an earlier rambling.
Utopia schmutopia.
Yeah, we touched about that. So this idea that we can now challenge the power and authority, or in the case of, okay, I guess we'll get there first, right? We always seem to start with scientific revolution with Galileo,
Yes.
right? And the challenge to the church, geocentric, heliocentric.
Well,
right, but we always give the credit. We know how it works in history. Galileo's name. We mentioned Copernicus. We mentioned Kepler. Right. We mentioned those guys, but it always seems to be Galileo whose name gets thrown out there.
So the thing about Copernicus is, though, Copernicus paid the price. Copernicus became the Copernicus was he was the test case because Copernicus gave up. He was in house arrest.
But as we know, those people in history fade away to the end, and it's the guy that gets stuff going in Galileo that, okay, we're going to give him the credit for it, right? At least that's the one that gets talked about. Even in big time AP style textbooks, they mention Galileo. Yes, they'll mention Copernicus. They'll mention Kepler, but it's always Galileo that gets out there, and
it's just more.
It's the player.
It's more attacks on the Polish people.
Yeah. Well, yes.
It's Nicholas Copernicus was Polish, and they just don't care.
Yeah, that could be true. I mean, you're gonna take a country and cut it in half 18,000 times. Take that, Ethan.
And that was a direct attack towards a student, which I'd like to admit. So the scientific revolution has to be there first. The scientific revolution starts the challenging, but I think it's not so much the challenging of it with this one. I think the scientific revolution gave us a foundation. I think it's more important that it gave us a foundation for how to study ourselves.
Yeah.
Because the Enlightenment is simply in my opinion, is the study of humanity and what are we doing.
Well, I don't think it was okay. So I used the term challenge, but because it's a challenge from the church sees it as a challenge.
Church sees everything as a challenge.
But they're already losing so much power. They've already lost so much prestige. They've already lost a lot of influence. Here now comes another attack on their power, their influence, right? And an organization that's so used to not having to admit they're wrong, even when you have somebody like Newton going, no, we can work these together, right?
Yeah.
And still come out and challenge. I think there's that power struggle there in it as well. And that power struggle opens it up for the political thinkers of the day that come into the Enlightenment, not only Locke and Hobbes, but Voltaire, Rousseau, Montesquieu, and all those guys to open up. because we take this process thought now, like, hey, I have this, let's play it out, let's experiment with it. And like you said, we're going to now do it socially, politically, not just
Ad infinitum.
in the natural sense. We're going to do that way.
So going back real quick to the point, it's always struck me as odd that the church didn't lean into this. For an example of how much the Catholic Church does not like to admit they're wrong officially. In 1992, it was 1992, when I was 12 years old, that they finally admitted to a heliocentric universe.
There's a whole paper,
Or solar system.
whole research with JP2,
Yeah.
re-examining the Galileo case.
And it's one
What
of
is that? 300 years later.
300 years later.
They re-examine.
But the problem that the church, I think, had in this case was, instead of leaning into these scientists and saying, what an amazing way of studying the creator's mechanisms, they decided to push back against it. I mean, Locke appeals to God, God-given rights. Hobbes appeals to God. The greatest power comes from God to the Leviathan. Newton said, look at all these things that I've found that God has made. Tycho, who got a moose drunk and fell downstairs and died.
The moose, not Tycho.
I mean, first one.
Then the other. But this is what I'm saying, right? These guys are almost kind of trying to drag the church thinking with them. Look, come on this journey, right? If you fight it, you should have learned what happens when you fight it. You had the whole deal with Martin Luther. You had the whole religious wars and the Huguenots and the Calvinists.
Is it Huguenots or Huguenots?
It's English. We can say it any way we want.
Ah.
Because we won the war. That's why we can say it any way we wish.
That is the historical ramblings of the Scherzer and Senate does not endorse the destruction caused by war or its after effects, but I'm okay with it. So I think the most important thing is the rationalization of human behavior and trying to find that and apply that natural science to us.
Okay.
So looking at Newton says, hey man, I've got some laws of motion. I don't know if you've noticed this, but when I do this, other stuff happens.
That's right.
And he's got three laws. And he's got three laws of motion, 3 laws of thermodynamics, a conspiracy.
Yeah. And then, of course, this calculus thing that he just comes up with before he's like,
be careful.
26.
I think the problem 15.
See, this is what I said before. He does all that stuff that we just mentioned before he's 26 years old.
Here's the thing that gets me, though. We got to be really careful because if we mention that he was one that came up with calculus, we're going to have 10,000 people who are going to come up with the other guy. So whose name I forgot.
I know they're going to come with the other guy, but watch the little YouTube thing with Neil Tyson on it, where he talks about how much he loves Newton, right? And all those things that Newton does before 26.
Quick digression, real quick. When did Neil deGrasse Tyson become like the end all be all for all scientific knowledge? Like that's the Trump part.
Yeah, if you got it, because everybody knows who he is. It's like how Bob Ross is the modern artist. Everybody knows Bob Ross
and his happy little trees. So basically,
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
It kills me. It's like, you can stop any argument flat with, well, there's a Neil deGrasse Tyson video about it, exactly. And then people just, I'm so sorry. We should go back in time. Your Holiness, this is Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he's hi. I want to throw my 2 cents in here.
Yeah.
So okay. So let's talk about the development thereof. Draw me that line real quick.
Between what? Between the science?
Between the science and the 2 guys on the side, the 2 guys in the middle.
You're dealing with the 2 guys on the side. You're dealing with empiricals.
Empirical. Talk to me about empirical. Define your terms.
The stuff you can touch and feel and be part of and see and
that got awkward.
And bind to it, right? That's what we're talking about with these guys. The 2 guys in the middle are political philosophers. They're political thinkers. This is what I think. This is how it should play out. And if it plays out, then this should happen. Well, you got to that experiment that those guys are talking about are going to outlive their lifetime to prove that they work, right?
Which guy are we talking about? The middle ones?
Yeah, the 2 middle guys, right?
Hobbes and Locke.
Because their ideas have to play out over time. I made the argument the other day talking to another group of individuals that we can take Hobbes's ideas and apply it to socialism and communism, right? So we can take that idea that was in the 1600s and we can make it fit into the 1840s with Marx in practicing communism, or at least theoretically practicing communism in the 20th century, right? Because man's, justifiably evil can't be trusted. The government's going to be a better overseer of what needs to happen, and if that happens, then people can start getting along and treat each other better. I mean, that's a quick paraphrase of it, but that's communism, right? We're all supposed to be in line. It's the communist with the socialism. Sorry, it's more
I was
socialism.
about to say,
It's more socialistic. I apologize.
this is why we need to have a camera so they can see my quizzical
Yeah,
looks.
it's socialism. I misspoke.
Well, okay. So then in that case, let me tell you that Locke is probably the better uh, receiver of these things, of these scientific knowledge, because of Newton's reasoning, because of not using like the Aristotelian observation, but basically, what we can see and what we can do. I have to have empirical evidence. Locke suggests that we have been for most of our lives a very cooperative group. And if you look at anthropological studies today, his is more borne out.
Yeah, people are rational,
People are rational
organized.
and they can be taught.
Yeah, and
The
and
tabula
Hobbes,
rasa,
Hobbes is the other side, is the opposite side, or
if I
the
may.
flip side of that. Maybe not the opposite side, but the flip side.
Mary Leakey, uh, one of the foremost
Yeah,
anthropologists, blah blah blah, found Lucy and all that stuff. Mary Leakey was asked when she thought civilization began, and instead of saying, like some great civilization like Sumeria or something like that, when we started living in cities, she said they found the bones of a Neanderthal, and the Neanderthal had a broken leg, but it had healed, and he had lived past the healing, which meant that people had
somebody
taken
to take
care
care of them,
had to
right?
take care of them, and that she said that's the beginning of civilization. And if you take that, even though he didn't know that information, Locke sees that as it. It only adds to Locke's uh, interpretation of human behavior.
Yeah.
We are rational, we are thoughtful, and the fact is, he can go back and say, because of the natural laws that we see around us, because the way we treat each other, in conjunction with our spiritual upbringing, this is why he's right. This is why his idea holds more weight and should be considered more. And America bought into it,
Yeah.
and so did all the
Well,
other.
the British buy into with the constitutional monarchy after the
Yep.
Civil War. I mean, that's their big debate, anyways, is the Civil War,
So would
right?
you
With Locke and Hobbes, because they take opposite sides.
talk more about that? That sounds
Well,
that's a great.
Hobbes sides with the absolutists, right? He's sides with uh, the Stuart line. It's the Stuart line that's in
Yep.
charge, right? He's an absolutist in how he kind of looks at it. He believes that his social contract says, hey, once you've agreed to this, and this is what was set up in the parameters, you're in it, right? This is what we agreed to. You're good. I mean, you should be happy. This is what's happening. They're taking all of a lot of decisions out of your hands. They don't have to be made for you. You don't have to worry about the basic mundane day to day stuff anymore. It's getting taken care of by the government, or it should be taken care of by the monarchy. He's the ruling power, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because people aren't cops, people aren't trusted, people
People
are
only
evil.
act. They're selfish. That's the thing.
Yeah, people are
It's not
selfish,
that
right?
we're
So
evil.
we're gonna take that away from you. We're gonna make those major economic decisions. We're gonna make those major, uh, you know, decisions like that, and we're gonna do those things for you. You don't have to worry about the political side of it. We got a monarch. He's in charge, and his job, and he's going to look out for the best of you. Whether you think he's doing it or not is irrelevant, because that's what he's going to do, right? Because in England we never take it to the divine right part. It's
No,
always absolute. The French stuff is different.
it's well, actually, it's kind of up to the divine right, Mark, but it's
But it's not Louis the 14th, Louis the 15th level
no,
divine
no,
right.
not divine, not
Yeah.
that level of divine. It is though. There was that fear after killing Charles the First of God's wrath upon us.
But you could argue that Cromwell becomes an absolutist when he takes charge. So he's following right exactly what Hobbes says is going to happen.
So you would say that the Cromwell and the Roundheads are no way Lockean?
I think they profess to be, but Cromwell comes in and he acts like an
Lord
absolutist.
Protector,
He's a
yeah.
Lord Protector of the Commonwealth. Scotland, you're part of us now. Wales, you're part of us now. We're the Commonwealth. We're now Great Britain. We're all linked together now because I kicked your ass and I kicked your ass, or you're going to join us because you're afraid of getting your ass kicked or something like that. I got rid of the Charles and James and Charles mess up. Now I'm in charge, but he turns into an absolutist, right? As much as these gentlemen think that Machiavelli is being cynical with his writing, we got a lot of examples of people like power.
They do.
And what's the quote? Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
There's that. There's that.
And can you make that argument that's happened to Cromwell? I mean,
Oh no, I can't make that argument.
if Monty Python makes a funny song about you, you must better done something either right or really wrong.
So I'll tell you this though, then it's the shift after Cromwell. Once we get two absolutists, once we get a excuse the expression, a good absolute, a good witch and a bad witch, a good absolutist,
Good absolutist,
and a
sure.
bad absolutist. Well, not even so much good absolutist, a traditional absolutist, the absolutist of the king that we are used to.
Yes.
And then we get this dictatorship absolutism. This you're all going to wear this, and you're all going to, when Cromwell comes in, and the
We call everybody citizen or comrade.
yeah. Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, I went there.
Easy
I went
killer.
there.
Citizen is not a bad thing. So and then,
What are we, Starship Troopers now?
well, find out more. Would you like to know more? So here's the deal. Locke comes in, and he's got this information, and then we had James and Charles gets killed, and then we have Cromwell, and then we have Charles II.
Yeah, I mean, James II.
But he comes back in, and we offer him to come back in. He does the whole restoration and stuff like that, and goes crazy. But the Bill of Rights comes out of this.
Well, that's what the Glorious Revolution was.
That's the Glorious Revolution,
right? Yeah, we get that
After
because
the second
they,
James.
they get tired of Charles II and James II, and they bring in cousins.
Well, it was interesting. They shopped around for monarchs.
Yeah.
They asked people to send in resumes, basically.
Basically, right? And who's got a lineage? Who's got this? What can we do? Will you abide by all these? Will you abide by all these rules?
But that's the thing. That's the rules.
Yeah.
The rules are Lockean. Now we're not fully a republic yet.
No.
But the idea is with those two. If there, here's a question. Then okay, let's make it.
Well, it's taking the Magna Carta and making it have teeth.
Bigger. Yeah, actually making. So we had this kind of proto idea of Lockean stuff with the Magna Carta, which is more empirical evidence that Locke is going to use.
Yeah, see, my thing with the Magna Carta is you stick a sword to anybody's throat, they're probably going to sign it regardless if they believe it or not.
That's only
and nobody follows it for 400
years. No, but you have to ask yourself, which Magna Carta? There's like 10 of them.
Yeah, but the one I always reference to is 1215.
Unfortunately, the one we always reference to, that one's not even the best one. That one's not even the one that actually affects the people the way.
No, it doesn't. But that's why that's why the Glorious Revolution comes in and we add to it, and Locke stuff adds to it, and becomes this thing that all of a sudden eventually is going to bite the British in the butt because they're going to lose their colonies.
They're going to lose their colonies because, well,
other Englishmen take Locke to the next.
We are far enough away to take it, and we are so ingrained when American colonies take this independent step. We are so soaked in our own self-control, self-rule, that Locke becomes the standard.
Yeah,
the self-rule isn't there enough. I would argue, actually, for fun, if we had like 2 hours to do this, I would like to argue that the feudal system was actually more. The peasants had more power then than they ever did when the absolute monarchs came in.
Well, isn't that the whole Peter the Great keeping the serfs in Russia for a while, and it took Catherine to get rid of that idea of serfdom.
Yeah, but he kept it because it was just easier.
Yeah, it was just easier.
I got stuff to do. I need peasants.
Exactly.
So you were telling me earlier that you had a question. What were you gonna?
Well, this can we link Hobbes to Hobbes? Well, because we can't put Locke with socialism and that, right? Because
hold on, you can't put Locke with socialism.
No, because you got Locke. Locke is all about private property. Locke is all about. I mean, the main role of government is to protect life, liberty, and property.
True.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can't get all the property you want in the socialist system.
No,
because the government's going to control some of it.
But I would argue
is a version of absolutism, right?
Well, that's communism.
No. The BBC is the British Broadcasting Company. It's run by the government.
True, but
British Airlines run by the government.
But Benthamesque, like socialism, is when the government controls the necessities. The socialist thing that we have is that the government controls the necessities to keep them flowing to the people. And I would argue that
Because the people can't be trusted, and because the people are disgusting, dirty, and evil.
I would argue
That's
that
Hobbesian.
that well, it's Hobbesian, but Locke would actually sit there and say anything other than that, anything that you want other than that, shouldn't be it shouldn't be held in common.
I think we're going to split hairs on this because
I'm gonna split everything here because you're coming after my precious socialism, and you're coming guns ablazing.
because again, agrarian societies basically coming out of because the early industrial revolution, 1600s, just the textile industries.
Yeah.
So we're not built there, right? So they're not seeing this immense wealth and this immense control,
No.
right? And that kind of stuff. But if you just start looking for connections, I think it's easier to put socialism and link it with Hobbes because the government has more controlling and authority of it, right? And if you're under this system, that the people can't be trusted with the money. Because
Okay.
if you're going to simplify political stuff, and sometimes it's easier just to think of it as a simplification, right?
Okay.
With money, who do you trust to do the right thing with the money? Do you trust the people, or do you trust a government, right?
Mm-hmm.
A free market system, a capitalistic based system, the great majority of decisions are supposed to be made by the people with the money. Yes, there's a few things the government gets involved in and regulates and do those sort of things because we don't have a totally free market anywhere. Although you could argue South Korea might be the closest.
I would
That
argue
we have.
that, yeah.
Yeah. But as you get more and more control, you get more. And we've had discussion on how much socialism do you want in your capitalism, right?
Yeah.
Right. And we're kind of leading back into that discussion we had earlier because the communication, the transportation, the water, the electricity, the phones, right? All of those things. What is controlled by the government? What could be controlled by private entities?
So
Right.
looking at Hobbes, and if we're gonna let's pursue that. Let's make that our focus. Let's link Hobbes and socialism then. Let's link Hobbes, but then again, I would argue that the democracy we have right now is becoming more and more Hobbesian.
Yeah, the government's getting more and more involved with stuff, and there's
And I think
and we got a more distrust with each other in the public too,
oh, absolutely.
and that's very Hobbesian. I would
I think Hobbes would look at where we are right now as a country and go, yeah, that's about where we'd start. And he'd say, this is the proto of where I'm going. This is the proto Leviathan. You need a Leviathan.
Yeah.
I mean, look at some of the people are arguing that. Well, hold on, you had your tirade. So I will grant that the government control of necessities in socialism would be seen as more Hobbesian than a Hobbes idea. But I would argue that the push towards more government centrality and central control that's been happening the last 10, 12 years is way more. People are craving Hobbes. They crave Hobbes more than we crave our Lockean our Locke stuff. We don't care about individual rights as more as we do.
No, yeah, we've lost that.
And that goes and that man goes all the way back to that first question we always ask, all the way back in our first thing is security or freedom.
Right?
Security versus
We're
freedom.
back to where we always seem to end up in that argument, right? That debate. I would agree. I think we even in our modern political parties, whether Republican or Democrat or conservative or labor, we'll just stick with the Anglo American
Yeah.
parties here. You you start talking about government control and regulation and how much they're going to get involved and should the government step in and when should the government step in and right?
Yeah.
Which is go all the way back. Are you protecting my life, liberty, and property? And now how much are you willing to give up to do those sorts of things? Right. And
Yeah.
the more you're willing to give up, I agree, Hobbes would be like, yeah, you're more leaning towards my side. Right. You're leaning towards my argument.
I think that's incredibly
I
crazy.
think that was mine, or was it yours as well?
These are our cell phones. I think what's crazy is that if you talk to a liberal leaning person and you explain who Hobbes is, they would sit there and say, "No, that's awful.
Yeah.
How could the government take over?" But I would argue that the liberal side is now calling for way more government control, especially of the economy.
Yeah.
But was Locke, and then Locke was talking about not necessarily, I don't know, I'm sure there's a Lockean scholar out there who's like,
You can correct all of us.
who's just sitting there like sputtering right now at the end of this coffee. Or
High school idiot court teachers, what are they doing? Yeah.
just tell me they're not teaching our students. This is why I have terrible grades my first semester. But I don't think Locke would. I don't think Locke is too much on the economic side. He just wants us to be able to make our rules to make sure that we have the opportunity to make this property. But I don't think it's property the way we're thinking about it in America today.
And it might not be right. Well, again, we warn our students all the time not to put your 20th century. Sorry,
Yeah, we do that all
20th
the
century
time.
mindset, new students, 21st century mindset back
Oh,
then. But property is still stuff.
property
Can
is
you
still
protect
stuff.
my stuff? I mean, the beautiful George Carlin skit about our stuff, right? They're supposed to protect our stuff. That's what he's talking about. Just define our stuff. And granted, we're talking
Okay, yeah.
300 years to now. What's our stuff?
Can you imagine a day when we're teaching George Carlin as one of the foremost 20th century philosophers?
Oh, I've always mentioned George Carlin. Just again, that idea of stuff. That's my stuff. That's your stuff. That's our stuff. It's stuff.
So who then protects the stuff better? Does Hobbes protect your stuff better, or does Locke protect your stuff better?
Well, I would argue that Hobbes says it's it's the government's job to protect your stuff from.
If you look at Hobbes, Hobbes says it's the government's job to keep you all from killing each other.
Yeah.
And stealing, yes, but mostly just keeping your personage safe. He never really talks too much about what you have.
Yeah, he doesn't.
And life without government is what? Nasty, brutish, and short, right? His is all about survival to the next day. Locke, I would argue, is more inclined to help you keep your property.
But that also goes back to the fact that what they feel about human nature. I would argue Hobbes thinks that human nature is untrustworthy. Humans in general are untrustworthy, and Locke's in reverse side sees the good side of people. We're rational.
My reading of Locke,
those arguments.
yeah, well, my reading of Locke actually sees that it's not necessarily that we're base good. It's the tabula rasa. It's the blank slate.
Yeah.
We are good by nature. We are cooperative by
But
nature.
doesn't Hobbes say we're inherently
we're inherently selfish.
Yeah, which is
Locke argues.
side of stuff.
Well, Locke would say you're selfish if the world has taught you to be selfish. I mean, look at our students these days. They're not bad kids, like for the most part. They're not really bad kids. What they are is incurious.
Yeah.
We have taught them not to be curious. We've taught them that they have, I'm holding up my phone now. We've taught them that they have the world's knowledge in their hands. So why bother learning?
Yeah.
And Hobbes would stop and look at that and say, well, who controls the information? And Locke would say, well, we all make sure the good information comes in. And Hobbes would say, and who is the gatekeeper for that information?
Yeah, they want somebody in control. That's where the absolute control would come.
So, is it safer to have a gatekeeper, or is it more stifling to have a gatekeeper?
We're back to the old security versus freedom. Right?
Oh God, that's back.
It comes back because if we have a gatekeeper, who regulates who's the gatekeeper? The gatekeeper. Who makes the rules of what can and can't be? We've seen what trouble that's done creating.
Oh man!
Right? Whether you want to go back to 1517 or you want to go to 2023, right? And some of the things that's happened in the in between. But have we not seen this with Facebook and Twitter and them monitoring posts and putting disclaimers on posts and correcting posts when they're wrong nowadays?
Can you imagine what ours are going to look like?
Yeah.
Here's all the rambling crap these two guys have said.
But you're like, okay, but who gets to do that? I mean, again, is that more government involvement? Is that a good thing? Right? And those are all the questions that come out of the Enlightenment. I'm going to try to get us back to the connections here, right? Right. And everything they're doing, and I'll go back to this. Everything they're doing is experimental.
Extraordinarily.
They're philosophies. They're hypotheses, right? Coming out of the scientific revolution. This is my hypothesis on how this government should work.
And we won't know until the government fails if the experiment corrected. That's what we call the Great American Experiment.
Yeah.
We're trying to see we are the Great American Experiment, along with several other modern day experiments,
The
to see
constitutional monarchy is still an experiment, right?
to see who will win. We're still trying to figure out: can we? It's not so much do we start out as a Locke or Hobbes style government. It's can we stay the course?
Yeah.
As I said, we started as an incredibly Lockean system, and now we are plunging headlong into Hobbesian. So let's tie that back to Newton and my man Tycho. Evidence. The big thing that connects those two gentlemen in the middle is the concept of a social contract. Both of them have it.
Yes.
And they're both generally the same idea.
Yes.
A social contract is the fact that you and I promise to give up certain rights, certain things we can do, in an effort to have the whole as a safer place. You give up your ability to murder me, and I give up my ability to murder you, in the fact that we don't want to be murdered. Is that too general, too specific?
Well, a little bit, but it's the same. It's the same thing. I mean, we're going to give a little something up, but their versions offered different, but how much you're going to give up. But and again, let's go back really quick. Doesn't it go back to the Ten Commandments in the Judeo-Christian Western Europe philosophy, right? Thou shalt not murder.
True.
I mean, if you want the proper translation, it's thou shalt not murder.
It's thou shalt not murder, but that then
so you're given this kind of directive on how to live. I mean, this now is just the government's going to make sure that it gets the government's role is to enforce that.
So then we're looking at then with Newton. Go back to Newton and Tycho and stuff like that.
Yeah.
What's the evidence that we're seeing? Because Newton and Tycho use their observations, use their data, use their stuff to make this sort of assumption.
And it's supposed to be repeatable, right?
Repeatable.
We're supposed to be able to see it over and over again. I can sit here and drop stuff on the floor all day long, and I can push a desk all day long, right?
Yeah.
And as long as there's nothing stopping it, that desk is supposed to keep going, right?
Yeah, until acted upon by a different force.
But we know there's different forces. There's friction and there's gravity and everything else. If I throw, going to the football game tonight, right? Those the ball gets passed, it's going to start coming down at some point, right?
That darned air resistance.
That air resistance and that thing called, gravity, right? But the beautiful thing is, right, the whole, which one drops faster, a ton of bricks or a ton of feathers?
The same thing. It's a ton.
In a vacuum.
In a vacuum.
Right? And we actually had to go to the moon to prove it. There's that classic video, and I forget what Apollo mission, but they take a hammer, they take a feather, and they drop, and they both hit the moon at the exact same time. Because
heavy ass feather.
Yeah. Right?
But
and $800 million spent to drop a rock and sorry, I take it back. I love what NASA was doing. I
miss what NASA was doing.
Yeah.
But so in that case, then we're living. You want to call it? I mean, like we got time, but you want to call it? Do you think the experiment is going to prove out to be Hobbesian or Lockean? Do you think who's going to win based on?
I think extreme Hobbesian has proven it doesn't work. Communism doesn't work.
Okay.
We've seen the failure of communism in the Soviet Union, in Cuba. You could say North Korea because they're really not communist.
Well, they haven't failed yet.
But it's more of a dictatorship than straight up communism because they don't have anything, right? The communism works best in an agricultural society. That's why Chinese communism is starting to come apart.
Yeah, because
they're starting to industrialize.
Way too much industry.
And so where do you go down? Well, you slide down to socialism, right? Now, can it work there? And then what version of socialism do you want, right? Because everybody loves the Swedes, right?
Okay.
Right? The Swedish version of socialism, especially economic socialism and governmental socialism, right? But again, to me, that goes back to the basic question: who do you trust with the money, right? If you're taxing people 50% at $50,000 or 50,000 income, whatever, with 50,000 euro income, and 50% of that's going to the government, right? And this is going to lead into our free isn't free discussions at some point, right? Okay, I just gave the government $25,000, is it free healthcare or is it entitlement healthcare? Is it free education or is it entitlement education? Because I've already paid into it. Don't we call Social Security an entitlement? Because we're entitled to it because we've already paid for it. So who do you trust with your money? We in our system are supposed to be able to shop around for things, including healthcare and things like that. And somebody who has medical issues, I sometimes tend to do those sorts of things where I get better care or stuff like that. But that means you got to put in the time and the effort.
So then I feel that in that case, we're failing Locke not because people are bad, but because people are inherently unmotivated to find a better method.
Yeah.
We are more locked onto the idea of path of least resistance. I don't think Locke ever thought about what we're seeing now.
No.
It's not going to be, it's not governmental control based upon the idea that the government's going to do better. It's governmental control because we're too busy to do it ourselves. But I would argue that the government has the biggest challenge to a Hobbesian system is that all of these companies and all of these special interests are so powerful that there's it's either the government might be the safer option because the government at least can ostensibly be for me, whereas these special interests and powerful companies are inherently powered by the bottom line.
What happens when the government becomes the special interest?
Explain.
North Korea, Soviet Union, they're in it for themselves. They're not in it for the people. East Germany looks like the end of World War II in the 1980s because they didn't fix anything, right? Eastern Europe doesn't get repaired by the Soviets because they're more about total power and control. They're not there to help anybody,
Okay.
right? You look at the big uprisings there that when that fails, right? And you get the fact that look what Germany's overall economic situation takes a dip when they come back together because West Germany has to now absorb
True.
it's like you get married to somebody that's got a big amount of debt. You know it's there. You've got to absorb it. So right now you've now lost a little bit of your economic prowess, spending power, whatever it is, right? But again, where's you're looking for empirical evidence coming out of this as well. And I know we're leaving off Voltaire and Rousseau and Montesquieu. And
Voltaire and Rousseau are there. That's more
and
individual rights. I'm talking more
because
about
they're looking at it from being Frenchmen.
In fact, I would also argue that Voltaire and Rousseau are more religious than anything. Even though, especially the one that was wanted you to be able to be an atheist.
Yeah.
Were more dedicated to the idea of
and they bring more social into
and more social. So
and we've been spending a lot of time.
Our boys here, Locke and Hobbes, are trying to use empirical evidence to classify the most unbelievably chaotic of all of creatures on this planet, humans.
Yeah, who
routinely act in our
and
own.
remember, they both said governments come from man, not from God.
That's true. They have both. So let's look at that real quick.
They both said that governments are a man-made creation, made by men for men. Right? They're not given to us from God. It's something that
and they back that up with the Bible verse: "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, render unto God what is God's." And so these gentlemen actually, so they're trying to find which
government works best. I mean,
which government works
we're
best.
back to that again, English Civil War battle here, right?
But here's the thing: the big connection between those two, which government works best. The great thing is, just like the scientific revolutionaries, they're casting off tradition and saying, let's look at this with clear eyes. What government works best? And Hobbes says, based on previous evidence, one single ruler works best. And Locke says, I disagree. We can all look at things at Rome. We can look at Greece where they had these experiments, these smaller schedules.
Fall apart.
They all fall apart, but we can fix them because they are made by men. They can be repaired by men.
Here's the bow, right? What if they compromised?
Do what?
What if they would stop arguing with each other? And I know Hobbes dies like 20 years.
I was about to say we'd have to have a seance.
But what if they were when they were both bickering back and forth during the English Civil War? right? And they're both picking sides. What if they both looked at each other and said, "Hey, what if a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and we kind of put our minds together and come up with something?" Because isn't that what we're trying to do?
What's what we're trying to do today? Absolutely.
Even though we've now lost, and again, either we're talking the British parliamentary system, hell, even the French system and the American system, we've lost that ability to compromise. These guys weren't compromising either. It is boom, here's my theory. Boom, here's my theory. None of this. Ooh, what if we look at both sides of the coin here and maybe come up with, I don't know, some edge parts we can agree on?
Then what we need more than anything is the same thing that started to happen in the scientific revolution: a slowly but increasingly informed public that can now make decisions not based on tradition or simple superstition. We need, here's the thing, we are in the midst of the greatest advances of technology ever, but we don't have any curiosity.
Yeah. Well, back then,
iPhone 15, for God's
yeah,
sake.
we back then though, you mentioned superstition. We talked about it today. I talked about it earlier today, right?
Yeah.
In the middle of the scientific revolution, in the middle of all this political thought, we have witch hunts throughout England and British North America where we're hanging witches, we're burning people at the stake because superstition is still really big. And that's not taking into account what's happening in Eastern Europe,
Oh God.
right? Because the Enlightenment's slow moving getting out there, right?
Even then,
we're talking Poland and Romania and places like that.
they're nailing people down as vampires.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So there's still superstition in these places where these thinkers are in England, in France, right, in British North America. We're still having this superstition playing, or as I challenged my lot today, or is it more a social casting with the superstitions? Who do we tag as being witches? Right?
Yes, the outsiders, the people we don't know how to fix.
Yeah.
The rabble rousers.
Yeah. So that play. I mean, in the middle of scientific revolution, we're supposed to be looking for empirical evidence, right? If we're smart intellectual men, right, and women, because there are women in the Enlightenment and in the scientific
Absolutely.
revolution, right? We're supposed to be smart. Where why do we have this empirical evidence? And yes, we can say it's the smaller villages, right? It's the country folk. It's the uneducated, right? And then they're basing it off of all that stuff, but they're still buying into it. How come we let that fester and not go up and say, hey, look, this is the new stuff we're talking about. Look how cool these things are.
Carl Sagan, who is probably, I think, the end point of the scientific revolution, somebody who is so far beyond. Carl Sagan could look at the world and say, "This is who we are," in a much better fashion than any philosopher I've ever seen before. The man mixed science and philosophy beautifully. Real quick, he was worried to death that we would stop pushing forward with scientific thought without trying to find evidence and trying to be curious and trying to have a hypothesis, and that we would you know be scared of the future as we consulted our crystals and read our horoscopes and clutched our sage and stuff like that. And I think the biggest problem he had would be, if we go back too far, the experiment fails. If we go back too much into tradition, if we go back too much into superstition, this wonderful experiment fails. But the biggest problem I think we have as a people is we don't realize it's still an experiment. We've been in it too long to remember it's stuff. It can be changed. We can fix this.
Yeah, but we keep, and there's that old stupid saying, right? Those that don't live in the history doomed to repeat it.
Yes.
Right? Late 1600s, all this superstition, witch stuff happens again. Right? Late 1800s, spiritualism, right? All of a sudden now it's the early 2000s. What's the big thing on TV?
Ghost hunters.
All those paranormal stuff. It's all coming back, right? Right? It's not like and we're not talking like the cute little ghost tours down in Galveston or Old Town Spring,
Which are fun.
or in at the Menger Hotel in San Antonio, places like that. This is stuff that's back out there, and everybody's doing it. It's all over the place, right? And we keep going back. So what are we searching for? The problem is, I think, unlike the scientific revolution guys and gals, they don't have a hypothesis. They don't have a purpose. They don't have, sorry, students, they don't have a thesis on what the heck they want to do with it. They just think it's fun and cool.
It's all about shoulda. Oh no, coulda, not shoulda.
Yeah.
There's no purpose to
There
it.
could be skepticism too. That could be a spiritualism in the mid to late 1800s, right? What's the point? What are we trying to do here? Do you have a purpose, or is it because it's new and different and it bucks authority a little bit?
I would argue that the purpose we need is to find a way to do what these gentlemen and ladies were trying to do with their time as well. Marry our need for purpose with our need for information. And that's the biggest problem we've got. And thus you get, your utopian societies, everything we talked about before. And when we cannot do that, when we cannot reconcile the spiritual needs with the scientific needs, that's when the imbalance causes major world conflicts. And that's one of the biggest things we're facing in America right now, our need for purpose and our need to grow.
I think we end right there.
Okay.
I think there's no better thought to end right there because, well, we're bumping up against a clock because some of us got to get somewhere. But that's a good thought. I mean, you're right.
So there we go. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time when we start talking about free isn't free.